Fate isn't a straight line. It's a cage, and sometimes the harder you run, the faster you hit the bars. Seraphina Vale is running for her life tonight. She's fleeing a wedding to a man she calls a monster, a man who bought her to settle a debt. In the pouring rain, she crashes into a stranger, a dark, powerful man who catches her, holds her close, and lets her cry about the nightmare she's escaping. She trusts him. She feels safe in his arms. But she doesn't see the phone in his hand. She doesn't know he's texting his men to lock down every exit in the city. Because the stranger holding her, he isn't her savior. He is the groom she's running from, and he just caught his bride. Nico DeLuca is walking a very thin line between protector and captor. Do you think he deserves a redemption arc? Or should Seraphina burn his empire to the ground? Subscribe and hit the bell and keep listening. You don't miss the moment she decides her next move. Chapter 1. The Announcement. Seraphina Vale had always believed that tragedy announced itself with thunder. That when your life was about to collapse, the universe would give you some warning, a tremor in the earth, a crack in the sky, something to brace yourself against the fall. She was wrong. Tragedy came on a Tuesday evening, in a living room that smelled like vanilla candles and her mother's lavender perfume. It came with her father's steady voice and her mother's composed expression. It came dressed as normalcy, as if they were discussing dinner plans instead of dismantling her entire existence. You'll be married in 2 days. Seraphina stood frozen in the doorway, her university textbooks still clutched against her chest. For a moment, she was certain she'd misheard, that the exhaustion from her evening statistics class had finally broken something in her brain. I'm sorry. What? Her father didn't look up from his newspaper. He never did when delivering news he knew would hurt. Marcus Vale had perfected the art of emotional distance over his 62 years, a skill that had served him well in business and poorly in fatherhood. Saturday, midnight. He turned the page with practiced efficiency. Everything has been arranged. The textbook slipped from Seraphina's arms, hitting the hardwood floor with a crack that made her mother flinch. But not her father. Nothing made Marcus Vale flinch. Arranged? The word tasted foreign on her tongue. Arranged by whom? By us, darling. Her mother's voice was soft, apologetic, in that performative way that meant she'd already made peace with whatever horror she was about to explain. Eleanor Vale was a woman who had spent 40 years perfecting the art of accepting the unacceptable. Your father made a business arrangement. And a business arrangement? Seraphina's laugh came out sharp, brittle. I'm not a piece of property you can trade. Now her father looked up, and the coldness in his eyes told her everything she needed to know about how wrong she was. Actually, he said slowly, folding his newspaper with deliberate precision, legally speaking, until you're 25 or married, you are exactly that. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Seraphina's feet. She gripped the doorframe, her knuckles white against the painted wood. You're joking. I wish I were. For the first time, something flickered across Marcus Vale's face. Not regret exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin. I made certain investments. They didn't pay out as expected. And when men like Nico DeLuca come to collect debts, they don't accept apologies. Nico DeLuca, the name hit Seraphina like a physical blow. Even sheltered as she'd been, wrapped in her university bubble of textbooks and coffee shops and late-night study groups, she knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. Nico DeLuca was the shadow that stretched across every dark corner, every whispered conversation, every news story that ended with no arrests and no answers. He was the man who owned things that couldn't be owned. politicians, judges, entire police precincts. He was the king of an empire built on blood and fear and money that never stayed clean for long. And apparently, he was her fiancé. No, the word came out steady, stronger than Seraphina felt. No, I won't do it. Seraphina, I said no. She was shaking now, rage and terror braiding together in her chest until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. You don't get to sell me like livestock because you made bad investments. Her father stood, and suddenly the room felt smaller. Marcus Vale wasn't a tall man, but he carried authority like a second skin, and right now, that authority was suffocating. This isn't a negotiation, he said quietly. The contract has been signed. The arrangements have been made. In 2 days, you will marry Nico DeLuca. Or, he stopped. But Seraphina heard what he didn't say in the silence that followed. Or what? Her voice had dropped to a whisper. What happens if I refuse? Her mother looked away. That was answer enough. The wedding is at midnight, Marcus continued, as if she hadn't spoken. A car will come for you at 11. I suggest you spend the next 2 days preparing yourself. Midnight. Something about that detail caught in Seraphina's throat. Why midnight? Her parents exchanged a look, brief, weighted with something that looked almost like fear. Because, her mother said softly, the man you're marrying doesn't appear in daylight. Seraphina didn't sleep that night. Or the next. She spent the first day in denial, convincing herself that this was some elaborate test, some cruel joke that would reveal its punchline at the last moment. She spent the second day researching, pulling up every article, every whispered rumor, every unconfirmed story about Nico DeLuca. What she found made her blood run cold. He was 34, unmarried, no known romantic connections, no publicized relationships, no trail of broken hearts or scorned lovers. He simply existed in the shadows, collecting power the way other men collected watches or cars. The few photos that existed showed a man with dark hair and darker eyes, sharp features that looked carved rather than born, and an expression that suggested he'd never smiled at anything that wasn't bleeding. And in 2 hours, she would belong to him. The dress her mother had laid out was white. Of course it was white, because even forced marriages demanded the performance of purity. Seraphina stared at it hanging on her closet door, this beautiful lie waiting to wrap itself around her body. She looked at her window instead. 3rd floor, a drain pipe running down the east side of the house, a fence she'd climbed 100 times as a child when the world still felt conquerable. Freedom was right there. All she had to do was take it. At 10 p.m., Seraphina Vale climbed out her bedroom window for the last time. The night air was cool against her skin, sharp with the promise of rain. She'd changed into jeans and a dark hoodie, stuffed her debit card and phone into her pockets, and left everything else behind. The white dress, the life her parents had tried to gift wrap in obligation, the future that had been sold without her signature. She was halfway down the drain pipe when she heard the car pull into the driveway. 15 minutes early. Panic flooded her system, hot and electric. Her hands slipped on the metal, and for one terrible moment, she was falling. Then her feet hit the ground, jarring but solid. She ran. Through the backyard, over the fence, down the alley that split her neighborhood like a dark vein. Behind her, she heard voices, shouting, the particular cadence of men who were used to being obeyed, discovering that their orders had been ignored. Seraphina didn't look back. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs screamed, until the familiar streets of her suburban neighborhood bled into the older, rougher edges of the city, where the lights grew dimmer and the shadows grew teeth. She ran until the rain started, and then she ran harder. The storm came fast, one of those violent autumn tempests that turn streets into rivers and visibility into a suggestion. Water plastered her hair to her face, soaked through her clothes, turned the world into a blur of headlights and neon and her own ragged breathing. She didn't know where she was going, only what she was running from. A monster who bought women, a marriage that was really a cage, a man who existed only in darkness because even the sun knew better than to look at him directly. She was so focused on what was behind her that she didn't see what was ahead, not until she crashed into it, into him. The impact should have knocked her to the ground, would have, if not for the hands that caught her. Strong, steady, impossibly warm despite the cold rain soaking them both. Easy. The voice was deep, textured like smoke and expensive whiskey. "You're all right, I've got you." Seraphina looked up, and for a moment, despite the rain, despite the fear, despite everything, she felt safe. The man holding her was tall, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her father's car. Dark hair fell across his forehead, rain-slicked and somehow perfect. But it was his eyes that caught her, dark, intense, and looking at her like she was something precious he'd found broken on the street. "I'm sorry," she gasped, trying to pull away. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't—" "Hey." His grip gentlened, but didn't release. "Breathe. Whatever you're running from can wait 30 seconds while you remember how lungs work." Something about his tone, calm but commanding, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed but made you want to obey it, cut through her panic. She dragged in a breath, then another. That's it. He guided her slightly to the side, out of the direct downpour, into the shelter of a building's overhang. "Better?" She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. He studied her for a moment, and something shifted in his expression. Concern, maybe, or recognition. But that was impossible. She'd never seen this man before in her life. "You're in trouble," he said. Not a question. Her voice cracked. "I need to leave the city. Tonight. Right now." "Why?" The gentleness in that single word broke something in Seraphina's chest. When was the last time someone had asked her why? When was the last time anyone had cared about her answer? And suddenly, stupidly, she was telling him everything. About the announcement, about the contract signed without her knowledge, about the wedding in 37 minutes to a man she'd never met. A monster who bought women like other men bought artwork, something to own and display and keep locked away from the light. She told a complete stranger all of it, words tumbling out in a desperate rush, because he was there and he was warm, and he had kind eyes in a world that had forgotten what kindness looked like. "He doesn't even appear in daylight," she heard herself saying, hating how her voice shook. What kind of man, what kind of human being lives like that? "He's a monster. He's waiting for you," the man said quietly. Seraphina nodded, wiping rain and tears from her face. "I'd rather die than belong to someone like that. I'd rather disappear completely than spend 1 minute as Nico DeLuca's." She stopped, because the man's expression had changed. The warmth hadn't left his eyes exactly, but something else had joined it. Something that made the rain suddenly feel colder, the night suddenly feel darker. "The wedding's at midnight?" he asked. "Yes." Her throat was tight. "How did you—" But he was pulling out his phone, thumb moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. Seraphina couldn't see what he was typing, but she saw his jaw tighten, saw something that might have been regret flicker across his features before he schooled them back into that careful kindness. He looked at her again, and this time she saw it. The recognition. Not surprised that he'd run into her. Surprised that she'd run at all. "No," Seraphina whispered, taking a step back. "No. You're not, you can't be." "I really wish," he said softly, pocketing his phone, "that our first meeting had gone differently." The world tilted. Nico DeLuca, because of course it was him. It could only ever have been him. Watched her with those dark, impossibly gentle eyes, And Seraphina understood, with sudden, terrible clarity, that she'd been right about one thing. She had run straight into a monster. She just hadn't realized he'd be holding her so carefully while he built her cage. Seraphina couldn't move. Her body had forgotten how to process commands, how to translate the screaming panic in her brain into something as simple as a step backward. She stood frozen in the rain, staring at the man who'd let her pour out her terror and desperation. Why, knowing every single word was about him. You knew. Her voice came out hollow. This whole time you knew who I was. Nico DeLuca didn't look away, didn't flinch, didn't offer her the mercy of pretending otherwise. Yes, that single word hit harder than any elaborate explanation could have. No apology threaded through it. No shame. Just a simple acknowledgement that he'd listened to her call him a monster while planning exactly how to ensure she'd never escape. The phone call. Seraphina's eyes dropped to his pocket where he'd just put his phone away. What did you send? For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd let her imagination fill in the blanks with every horrible possibility. But then he said, quietly, I told my men to lock down every exit of the city. Train station, bus terminal, all highway on-ramps within a 30-mile radius. His jaw tightened. I made sure you can't run again. The rain felt colder now. Or maybe that was just her blood, turning to ice in her veins. While I was... She couldn't finish the sentence. While I was crying against your chest. While I was begging you to help me. While I was calling you kind. I know what you think of me right now. Nico took a step closer, and Seraphina forced herself not to retreat. She wouldn't give him that. Wouldn't let him see how completely he'd shattered what little courage she'd had left. And you're right to think it. Am I? Bitterness flooded her mouth, sharp and metallic. Because I think I haven't even scratched the surface of what you actually are. Something flickered in his eyes. Not quite pain, but perhaps its shadow. Probably not. Did you enjoy it? The question burst out before she could stop it. Listening to me beg, watching me trust you? No, liar. I've done a lot of things in my life that would make you sick to know about, Nico said, his voice dropping to something rougher, more honest. But I've never enjoyed watching someone suffer, especially not you. Especially not, Seraphina's laugh came out sharp, jagged. You don't even know me. His expression shifted. Something in his eyes went dark, not with anger, but with a certainty that was somehow worse. I know you prefer tea to coffee, Earl Grey specifically, with honey instead of sugar. I know you take the long way home from your Tuesday evening class because you like walking past the bookstore on Fifth, even though you never go in. I know you hate crowds, but love museums when they're nearly empty. I know... Stop. Her voice cracked. Stop talking. But he didn't. I know you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I know you fold the corners of pages in your textbooks, even though you feel guilty about it afterward. I know you want to be an actuary because you like the idea of predicting outcomes, of finding certainty in a world that feels chaotic. Each word landed like a physical blow, because he was right, all of it, every single detail. How long? Seraphina heard herself ask. How long have you been watching me? Nico was quiet for a moment, and in that silence, she understood that the answer would be worse than she'd imagined. 2 years. The ground seemed to drop away beneath her feet. 2. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the horrifying implications of what he'd just admitted. 2 years? I saw you in a coffee shop. His voice had gone softer now, almost distant, like he was remembering something that existed outside the rain-soaked street where they stood. You were studying for finals. Your hair was tied up and you had ink smudged on your fingers. Someone bumped your table and your coffee spilled everywhere. And instead of getting angry, you just laughed. Seraphina remembered that day. Remembered the burned statistics textbook, the ruined notes, the mess that had somehow felt like the universe's way of telling her to take a break. She'd had no idea she was being watched. No idea that laugh had sealed her fate. "You looked," Nico continued, "like you belonged to a world I'd forgotten existed. Something clean, untouched by—" He gestured vaguely at the dark street around them. "By this. So you decided to ruin it." The words tasted like ash. "To drag me into your world and destroy everything you apparently liked about me." "No." His denial came fast, almost fierce. "I decided to keep you safe from it." "By buying me?" Seraphina's voice rose. "By forcing me into a marriage I never agreed to? By making sure no one else could touch you?" The intensity in those words startled them both. Nico stepped back, running a hand through his rain-soaked hair, and for the first time since she'd crashed into him, he looked shaken. "Your father's debt," he said after a moment, his voice controlled again, "wasn't to me. It was to the Antonov family. Do you know who they are?" Seraphina shook her head. "Good. That means you've been lucky." His expression darkened. "Viktor Antonov doesn't accept money to settle debts. He collects in blood, in screams, in daughters who disappear into shipping containers, and art found until long after they've learned to stop hoping for rescue." The street felt too quiet suddenly, too exposed. "3 months ago, your father came to me," Nico continued, "begging. Said he'd do anything if I'd buy his debt from Antonov. Said he had a daughter, and if I didn't intervene. So you bought me instead." Seraphina's voice was flat. "How heroic. I bought your safety." He moved closer, and this time she did step back. "I gave you 3 more months of normal life while I made sure Viktor couldn't touch you. 3 months of your coffee shops and bookstores and Tuesday evening classes. 3 months where you got to exist without knowing what had almost happened." "You think that makes this better?" Her back hit the wall behind her, cold brick, slick with rain. "You think I should thank you for stealing my life more gently than someone else would have? I think you should understand that in my world there are no good choices, only terrible ones and worse ones." Nico stopped just outside her personal space, close enough that she could see the muscle ticking in his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. "And I chose the option where you stay alive. As your wife. Yes, as your property." His eyes flashed. "You are not property." "Then what am I?" Seraphina demanded. "If I can't leave, can't refuse, can't make a single choice about my own existence, what exactly do you call that?" "Protected." The audacity of that word, delivered with such absolute conviction, made something snap inside Seraphina's chest. "You're insane," she breathed. "You're actually insane if you think." Behind Nico, headlights cut through the rain. 3 black cars pulling up to the curb with the synchronized precision of men who'd done this before. Doors opened. Men emerged, 6 of them, all dressed in dark suits, all moving with that particular awareness that said they were armed and knew how to use what they carried. One of them approached, stopping a respectful distance from Nico. "Sir, the exits are secured." "Good." Nico didn't look away from Seraphina. "Have the car brought around." "No." The word came out strangled. "No, I won't." "You will." His voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse, because in 23 minutes, you're supposed to be at your parents' house, getting into a wedding dress, and if you're not there, if you've disappeared without explanation. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Seraphina thought of her mother. Weak, yes. Complicit, absolutely. But still her mother. Still the woman who'd braided her hair and read her bedtime stories and probably hadn't slept in 3 days, knowing what was coming. "You'd hurt them," she whispered. "I wouldn't." Nico's expression was unreadable. But Viktor Antonov would. The moment your father's debt transfers back to him, your entire family becomes expendable. "You're blackmailing me." "I'm giving you context." A sleek black car pulled up, and one of the men opened the rear door. Waiting. Seraphina looked at that open door, at the warm leather interior, at the prison dressed up as luxury, and felt something inside her go numb. This was it, the moment where she stopped being a person and became a possession. "If you run again," Nico said quietly, "I will find you." And next time, I won't be gentle about it." "You call this gentle?" His eyes met hers, and for just a moment, she saw something in them that looked almost like regret. "You have no idea how gentle I'm being." Then he stepped back, gesturing toward the car. Seraphina wanted to fight, wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except climb into that vehicle and accept the future he'd constructed for her. But she thought of her mother, of the Antonov family, and what Nico had implied they'd do, of how there were no good choices in his world, only terrible ones and worse ones. She got in the car. Nico slid in beside her, and the door closed with a sound like a coffin sealing. The interior smelled like leather, an expensive cologne, and the death of hope. As the car pulled away from the curb, Seraphina stared out the window at the rain-soaked streets, at the city she'd tried to escape, at the life she'd never get back. "I'll never forgive you for this," she said to her reflection in the glass. "I know," Nico replied, and somehow the sadness in his voice made it all worse. Because a monster who enjoyed his cruelty could be hated cleanly, completely. But a monster who genuinely believed he was saving her, that was something far more dangerous. The car drove through the rain toward midnight, toward a wedding that wasn't a beginning, just a beautiful, brutal end. Chapter 3. The Vows. The venue wasn't what Seraphina had expected. She'd imagined something cold, industrial, the kind of warehouse-turned-event space where blood could be hosed off concrete floors and no one would ask questions about the stains. Instead, the car pulled up to an estate that looked like it had been stolen from a Gothic romance. All stone facades and wrought iron gates. Gardens that even in the rain looked like they'd been designed by someone who understood that beauty and danger often wore the same face. "This is your house?" Seraphina asked as they passed through the gates. One of them. Of course, because one mansion wasn't enough when you owned a city. The car stopped at the front entrance, where a woman waited under a massive umbrella. She was older, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair pulled into an elegant knot, and the kind of posture that suggested she'd been trained in etiquette, the same way soldiers were trained in combat. "Mrs. Chen," Nico said as they exited the vehicle, "this is Seraphina." Mrs. Chen's expression didn't flicker. She simply inclined her head, a gesture that managed to convey both respect and complete emotional detachment. "The dress is ready," she said, as requested. "Good." Nico turned to Seraphina, and his voice dropped. "Mrs. Chen will help you prepare. The ceremony begins in 40 minutes. And if I refuse to put on the dress, then you'll be married in wet jeans." His expression didn't change. "I don't particularly care what you're wearing when you become my wife, but I thought you might." There was something infuriating about his reasonableness, about the way he presented this nightmare as if he were doing her a favor by letting her choose between humiliation and slightly less humiliation. Seraphina followed Mrs. Chen inside without another word. The room they led her to was beautiful enough to make her hate it. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the gardens, even though the rain and darkness meant she could see nothing but her own reflection staring back at her. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, dressed in silk sheets that probably cost more than a semester of her tuition. And on a mannequin by the window, the dress. It wasn't the one her mother had chosen. That had been white, traditional, suffocating in its innocence. This was something else entirely. The fabric was the color of champagne, pale gold that caught the light, like captured sunlight. The design was elegant, almost Grecian, with a neckline that would leave her shoulders bare and fabric that would move like water against her skin. Beautiful without being showy, expensive without being ostentatious. It was exactly what she would have chosen for herself, and that made her hate it even more. "He picked this," Seraphina said. Not a question. Mrs. Chen nodded, her expression professionally neutral as she began helping Seraphina out of her wet clothes. "Mr. DeLuca is quite particular about such things. How long have you worked for him?" 18 years. "And in 18 years, have you ever seen him bring a woman here?" Mrs. Chen's hands paused for just a moment. So brief, Seraphina almost missed it. "No," she said quietly. "You're the first." Something about that answer sat wrong in Seraphina's chest. She couldn't decide if it made things better or worse, if being his first victim held some perverse honor. or if it simply meant she was breaking new ground in his particular brand of cruelty. The dress fit perfectly. Of course it did. Because Nico DeLuca had been watching her for 2 years, studying her measurements along with her habits, collecting data about her body the way he'd collected data about her soul. Mrs. Chen worked in efficient silence, pinning Seraphina's damp hair into something elegant, applying subtle makeup that somehow made her look both beautiful and terrified. "There are no bars on the windows," Seraphina said suddenly, staring at her reflection. "I could run again." "The glass is reinforced," Mrs. Chen replied calmly, applying mascara with a steady hand. "And there are guards posted at every exit. Mr. DeLuca is many things, but careless is not one of them." "Does that make you feel good, helping him trap someone?" For the first time, Mrs. Chen's professional mask cracked. She set down the mascara and met Seraphina's eyes in the mirror. "I watched my daughter marry a man I despised," she said softly, "not because anyone forced her, but because she loved him, and love made her blind to what he was. He beat her for 3 years before she finally gathered the courage to leave him. And when she did," Mrs. Chen's jaw tightened, "he killed her rather than let her go." Seraphina's breath caught. Mr. DeLuca found the man responsible, made sure he understood what it felt like to be powerless, to be hurt by someone stronger. And when it was over, she returned to the makeup, her hands steady again. "Mr. DeLuca gave me this job, gave me purpose when I had nothing left but grief." "So you think this is the same?" Seraphina demanded. "You think he's saving me?" "I think," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "that monsters come in many forms, and some of them, very few, but some, learn to build cages that look like kingdoms because they genuinely believe that's what safety requires. That doesn't make it right." "No," Mrs. Chen agreed, "but it makes it survivable." At 11:47 p.m., someone knocked on the door. Seraphina expected Nico, expected to be collected like luggage and escorted to her own execution. Instead, a woman entered. She was young, maybe 30, with warm brown skin, dark curls pulled into a high ponytail, and eyes that sparkled with something that looked dangerously close to mischief. She wore a deep purple dress that hugged her curves, and when she smiled, it was with the kind of genuine warmth that felt completely out of place in this house of beautiful monsters. "So you're the one who made Nico DeLuca lose his carefully maintained mind," she said, shutting the door behind her. "I had to see for myself." "Who are you?" "Lucia Santos, Nico's lawyer. Also, the closest thing he has to a conscience, though that's a pretty low bar." She crossed the room, studying Seraphina with unabashed curiosity. "You ran." "I tried." "Good." Lucia's smile widened. "That means you've got survival instincts. You're going to need them. Are you here to what? Give me tips on how to be a mafia wife?" "God, no. I'm here because I made Nico promise that before he married you, I'd get 5 minutes alone with you." Lucia perched on the edge of the bed, crossing her legs. "To make sure you understand what you're walking into." "A prison," Seraphina said flatly. "I'm walking into a prison." "Maybe." Lucia tilted her head, considering. "Or maybe you're walking into the single most secure position a woman could have in this city. Depends on how you play it. I don't want to play anything. I want to leave." "Can't help you there, honey. Nico's made up his mind, and once he does that," she shrugged, "stopping him would require an act of God or a particularly creative lawyer, and even I have my limits." "Then why are you here?" Lucia's expression shifted, the mischief fading into something more serious, more genuine. "Because in about 10 minutes, you're going to stand in front of a man who terrifies grown criminals and promise to spend your life with him. And I thought you should know." She leaned forward. "He's absolutely out of his mind about you. Has been for years. And that gives you power." "Power?" Seraphina laughed bitterly. "I couldn't even leave the city." "Because he was smart enough to cut off your exits. But sweetheart, the fact that he had to, the fact that he's been so careful, so methodical, so absolutely meticulous about every detail of this arrangement." Lucia's eyes gleamed. "That's not the behavior of a man who's in control. That's the behavior of a man who's terrified of losing something he's convinced himself he can't live without. Seraphina wanted to dismiss it, wanted to laugh at the absurdity of this woman, this lawyer who worked for monsters, trying to frame her kidnapping as some twisted romance. But something in Lucia's words caught like a hook in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Nico DeLuca has built an empire on being untouchable, on never wanting anything badly enough that losing it would hurt him." Lucia stood, smoothing her dress. "And then he saw you laugh over spilled coffee. And suddenly he's buying your father's debt, rearranging his entire organization, and losing sleep over whether you'll hate him." "I do hate him." "Good. Hold on to that." Lucia moved toward the door, then paused. "But also remember, a man who's never been vulnerable before is dangerous when he finally is, because he doesn't know how to handle it. And that means," she smiled, and this time it was sharp, "you might be the only person in this city who could actually destroy him. If you're smart about it." Then she was gone, leaving Seraphina alone with her reflection and a truth she didn't know what to do with. At midnight exactly, Nico came for her. He'd changed, now wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than most people's cars, his hair dry and perfectly styled, his expression carefully controlled. But his eyes when he looked at her in that dress. "You're beautiful," he said quietly. "Don't. It's true." "I don't care if it's true." Seraphina forced herself to hold his gaze. "I don't want to be beautiful for you." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or the acknowledgement that beauty unwillingly given was just another kind of theft. "The officiant is waiting," he said instead. He offered his arm. She ignored it, walking past him toward the door, toward whatever fresh nightmare waited beyond it. The ceremony was held in what Nico had called the garden room, a conservatory filled with night-blooming flowers and candles that turned the rain-streaked windows into mirrors. A handful of people stood as witnesses: Mrs. Chen, Lucia, and 3 men Seraphina didn't recognize, but who all had the particular stillness of people who'd killed before and would again. The officiant was a woman in her 50s, wearing judicial robes and an expression that suggested she'd presided over far stranger weddings than this. "Shall we begin?" she asked, as Seraphina and Nico reached the small altar. "No," Seraphina wanted to scream. "No, let's not begin. Let's end this. Let me go. Let me be anything except this man's wife." But she thought of her mother, of Viktor Antonov, of terrible choices and worse ones. "Yes," Nico said. The ceremony was mercifully short, standard vows with all the love and devotion carefully edited out, leaving only the legal framework, the contractual language that would bind Seraphina to Nico in the eyes of the law. "Do you, Nico DeLuca, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was steady, certain, like this was a choice he'd already made 1,000 times. "And do you, Seraphina Vale, take this man?" Seraphina opened her mouth and realized that this was it, the moment where she stopped being herself and became his, where every choice she'd ever make would be filtered through the cage he'd built and called safety. In the silence that followed, she saw Nico's jaw tighten, saw something that might have been fear flicker across his expression. Because for all his power, all his careful planning, all his locked exits and hired guards, he couldn't make her say yes. And in that moment, Seraphina understood exactly what Lucia had meant about power. She could refuse, could detonate this entire arrangement right here, right now, in front of witnesses and lawyers and an officiant who'd probably never had someone decline at the altar before. It wouldn't save her, wouldn't change the fundamental truth that she was trapped in this house, in this life, in this man's obsession. But it would hurt him, would strip away the veneer of civility he'd wrapped around this abduction and force him to confront what he actually was. The words sat on her tongue, bitter and satisfying. "No, I don't." But then she looked at Nico's eyes, at the fear hiding there, the vulnerability he probably didn't even realize he was showing, and understood something else. A man who was afraid could be manipulated. A man who was vulnerable could be controlled. A man who wanted her approval badly enough to pretend this was a choice might, eventually, be convinced to give her actual choices. And if she said no now, She'd lose whatever leverage that fear might give her. Seraphina met Nico's gaze and let him see her contempt, her fury, her absolute certainty that she would never forget what he'd done. Then she smiled, sweet, empty, devastating. "I do," she said. The relief that flooded Nico's expression should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like the first move in a much longer game. "Then by the power vested in me," the officiant said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Nico leaned in, and Seraphina realized with sudden horror that he intended to kiss her. To seal this nightmare with something that looked like affection, she turned her head at the last moment. His lips brushed her cheek instead, gentle, almost reverent. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "For what? For saying yes? For not destroying him in front of his people? For pretending, just for a moment, that this was something other than what it was?" Seraphina didn't answer. She simply stood there, in her beautiful dress, in her beautiful cage, and let the applause wash over her like rain. The reception was a nightmare, dressed as celebration. Champagne flowed. Music played. Something slow and elegant that probably cost a fortune to arrange. The handful of guests offered their congratulations with the kind of professional enthusiasm that said they'd been threatened if they didn't seem happy enough. And through it all, Nico stayed close, not touching her. He seemed to sense that would shatter whatever fragile peace had been established, but near enough that she could feel his presence, his constant awareness of exactly where she was and what she was doing. "You can smile, you know," Lucia said, appearing beside Seraphina with a champagne flute. "It won't kill you." "Won't it?" "Probably not, though I've seen stranger things happen at weddings." She took a sip, studying Seraphina over the rim. "You surprised him." "Saying yes. I surprised myself." "Good, keep doing that." Lucia's eyes sparkled. "Predictability is dangerous when you're married to someone who spent 2 years learning your patterns." "Is that why you're here? To give me cryptic advice?" "I'm here because someone needs to make sure you survive the next few months with your sanity intact." And since Nico's terrible at recognizing his own psychological damage, she shrugged. "I figured I'd help you recognize his instead." Before Seraphina could respond, one of the men from the ceremony approached, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running through his left eyebrow and eyes that probably smiled once in 1987 and never bothered again. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, and Seraphina flinched at the name. "I'm Marco, head of security." "Congratulations on your promotion to prison warden," Seraphina replied. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Marco's scarred face. "Actually, I wanted to tell you." He glanced at Lucia, who nodded encouragingly. "To East Wing Study, 2nd floor. The door code is 2847. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because it's the only room in this house where the security cameras don't record. Mr. DeLuca uses it when he needs privacy." Marco's expression didn't change. "Thought you might want to know where you can breathe without being watched." Then he walked away, leaving Seraphina staring after him. "Did he just help you?" Lucia grinned. "Yeah. Nico inspires a weird kind of loyalty in his people. They'll kill for him without question. But they also," she paused, searching for words, "they want him to be happy. And I think Marco's smart enough to realize that a wife who feels like a prisoner won't make him happy in the long run. I am a prisoner. For now." Lucia set down her champagne. "But remember what I said. You have power here, even if you can't see it yet. Use it." At 2 a.m., the reception finally ended. The guests departed, or more accurately, were dismissed by Nico with a subtle gesture that said he was done performing normalcy for the night. Mrs. Chen appeared, her expression as neutral as ever. "Your room is prepared," she said to Seraphina. "Her room," Nico corrected quietly, "is with me." The floor seemed to drop away beneath Seraphina's feet. "No, you're my wife. In name only, in law." His voice was gentle, which made it worse. "Which means we share quarters. That's non-negotiable. You said I wasn't property." "You're not." He took a step closer, and Seraphina hated how her body tensed. How every survival instinct screamed at her to run, even though there was nowhere left to go. "But you are under my protection. And that means you stay where I can guarantee your safety." "You mean where you can watch me?"
Yes. At least he was honest. If you're expecting, Seraphina's voice shook despite her best efforts to control it. If you think I'm going to, I expect nothing. Nico's eyes were steady on hers. The room has a bed. We'll share it because that's what married couples do. And anyone in my organization who thinks otherwise is a security risk. But his jaw tightened. I won't touch you. Not without your permission. I'll never give permission. Then I'll never touch you. He said it with such absolute certainty that Seraphina almost believed him. Almost. I want to see the room first, she said. Of course. Nico's bedroom, their bedroom now, apparently was both better and worse than Seraphina had imagined. Better because it was actually beautiful. Enormous windows overlooked the gardens, now just dark shapes against darker sky. The bed was large enough for 4 people, dressed in dark sheets that looked like they cost more than her parents' house. Everything was elegant, expensive, and surprisingly normal. Worse because it was all Nico.
His cologne hung in the air, that expensive scent she'd noticed in the car. His books lined the shelves, business texts mixed with philosophy and, surprisingly, poetry. His life existed in every carefully curated detail. And now she was supposed to exist here too. The bathroom's through there, Nico said, gesturing. I had Mrs. Chen stock it with whatever you might need, but if there's anything missing, why midnight? Seraphina interrupted. He paused. What? The wedding. Why did it have to be at midnight specifically? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer, that he'd deflect or lie or simply stare at her with those dark eyes that saw too much. But then he moved to the window, looking out at the darkness, and said quietly, because I needed you to be legally mine before sunrise. The way he said it made her blood run cold. Why? Nico's reflection in the window met her eyes. Because at dawn, your legal identity was being erased. The world tilted. What? When we married, your documents were transferred into my custody. Birth certificate, passport, social security number. Everything that proves Seraphina Vale exists. His voice was gentle, which made the horror of what he was saying somehow worse. By sunrise, all of it will be sealed under my family name, accessible only with my permission. Seraphina couldn't breathe. You're saying, I'm saying that even if you run now, even if you somehow escape this house, this city, this life. He turned to face her. There's no government, no institution, no system in this country that will recognize you as Seraphina Vale. That person stopped existing the moment you became my wife. She thought she might be sick. That's not legal. You can't just erase someone. You'd be surprised what's legal when you own the right lawyers and have the right connections. His expression was unreadable. I told you. Seraphina, I made sure you'd be safe. And safe means trapped. The word came out hollow. Safe means I can never leave. Safe means, Nico corrected quietly, that Viktor Antonov and every other monster in this city knows that if they touch you, they're touching what's mine. And no one is stupid enough to do that. He said it like it was a gift, like he'd given her freedom instead of taking it. Seraphina looked at this man, this beautiful, terrifying, completely insane man who'd stolen her entire existence and wrapped it in justifications, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, not yet, but the sound things make right before they shatter. Get out, she whispered. This is my room. I don't care. Her voice was rising, control slipping. Get out, get out, get out. Seraphina, I said get out. She grabbed the nearest thing, a book from his nightstand, and hurled it at him. It missed, hitting the wall with a crack that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Nico didn't move, didn't flinch. He just stood there, letting her rage wash over him, and the understanding in his eyes made it all so much worse. I'll sleep in my study tonight, he said finally. You can have the room to yourself. I don't want your room. I don't want anything from you. I know. He moved toward the door, and Seraphina thought he'd just leave. That he'd give her this small mercy of solitude. But he paused in the doorway, his back to her. I need you to understand something, he said quietly. Everything I've done, all of this, it wasn't to hurt you.
It was to keep you safe from a world that would destroy you just for existing near me. You are the world that's destroying me. I know, he said again. And then he was gone.
Leaving Seraphina alone in his room, their room, wearing a wedding dress and a new name, and the sudden, terrible understanding that she hadn't just lost her freedom tonight. She'd lost proof that she'd ever been free at all. If you were her, would you have said I do? Or would you have burned it all down, consequences and all? Tell me in the comments. Chapter 4. The morning after. Seraphina didn't sleep. She spent the hours between midnight and dawn sitting by the window, still wearing the dress that had become her prison uniform, watching as the sky slowly shifted from black to gray to the pale, sickly gold of early morning. Somewhere out there, as the sun rose, Seraphina Vale stopped existing. Birth certificate, sealed. Passport, restricted. Social security number, transferred. Every document, every record, every piece of paper that proved she'd ever been a person separate from Nico DeLuca was being systematically erased, locked away. Made inaccessible to anyone except the man who now owned her identity along with everything else. She should have felt something. Rage, terror, grief. Instead, she felt numb. Like her body had finally accepted what her mind couldn't, that fighting this was pointless. That Nico had built a cage so complete, so absolute, that even her paperwork was part of the bars. At 7 a.m., someone knocked on the door. Seraphina didn't answer, but Mrs. Chen entered anyway, carrying a tray with tea and what looked like breakfast pastries. "Mr. DeLuca thought you might be hungry," she said, setting the tray on a side table. "Mr. DeLuca can go to—" "He didn't sleep either," Mrs. Chen interrupted calmly. "Spent the night in his study, staring at financial reports he's probably memorized. He does that when he's upset. Buries himself in numbers until his mind stops screaming at him. I don't care if he's upset. I know." Mrs. Chen moved toward the massive walk-in closet, opening doors to reveal more clothes than Seraphina had owned in her entire life. "But I thought you should know, the man who just erased your identity, he's currently in a meeting with his accountant, trying to figure out how to put money in a trust fund for your education without you knowing about it." That made Seraphina turn. "What?" "He knows you wanted to finish your degree, so he's setting aside money to ensure you can, even though—" Mrs. Chen pulled out a pair of jeans and a soft sweater. "Even though he understands you'll probably use that education to find a way to hurt him eventually. Then why allow it?" Mrs. Chen looked at her for a long moment, her expression softer than Seraphina had seen before. "Because loving someone badly is still loving them," she said quietly. "Even if you're too broken to do it right." Seraphina showered, changed, and went looking for the study Marco had mentioned, the one without cameras. The house was enormous, 3 floors of elegant architecture, designed to look welcoming while being absolutely fortified. She passed guards stationed at strategic points, all of whom nodded respectfully as she walked by, not stopping her, but definitely tracking her movement. She found the study on the 2nd floor, exactly where Marco had said. The door had a keypad. She entered the code, 2847, and heard the lock click open. Inside, the room was smaller than she'd expected. Cozy, almost. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a desk covered in papers, a leather chair that looked like it had been sat in 10,000 times. One window, overlooking the gardens that in daylight looked almost beautiful. No cameras, just silence and the faint smell of old books. Seraphina sank into the chair and finally let herself cry. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the future that had been stolen, for her parents who'd sold her, and the degree she'd probably never finish, and the coffee shop on 5th Street she'd never walk past again. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, and the numbness cracked just enough to let the pain through. And when she was done, when there were no tears left, she started looking through the papers on the desk. Because if this was Nico's private study, the place he came when he needed to be unwatched, then maybe there was something here, some piece of information she could use, some weakness she could exploit. She was so focused on the documents that she didn't hear the door open. Looking for something? Seraphina spun around. Lucia stood in the doorway, holding 2 coffee cups and wearing a knowing smile. Marco told you about this place, didn't he? She entered, closing the door behind her. Smart man. Figured you'd need somewhere to plot. I'm not plotting. Liar. Lucia handed her one of the coffees. Earl Grey latte, somehow exactly how Seraphina preferred it. But that's okay. If you weren't plotting, I'd be disappointed. Shouldn't you be on Nico's side? I am on Nico's side, which means Lucia settled into the chair across from the desk. I'm also on yours. That doesn't make sense, doesn't it? I've known Nico for 6 years, watched him build an empire on being emotionally untouchable, on never caring enough about anything that losing it would hurt. Lucia sipped her coffee, and then he saw you, and suddenly he's making mistakes, taking risks, doing things that could get him killed if his enemies realized he'd developed a weakness. I'm not his weakness, I'm his prisoner. You're both. Lucia leaned forward, and that's the problem. Because Nico spent his entire life learning how to control things, businesses, politicians, entire criminal organizations, but he's never learned how to love someone without trying to control them too. He doesn't love me, he's obsessed with me. There's a difference. Is there? Lucia tilted her head. Because from where I'm sitting, obsession is just love that hasn't learned how to be healthy yet. And the fact that he's trying, badly, catastrophically, but trying, to keep you safe says something. It says he's insane. Well, yes, but he's insane in a way that might eventually be worked with. If you're smart, if you're patient. Lucia's expression turned serious. If you understand that you're playing a long game now. Seraphina wanted to reject everything Lucia was saying, wanted to insist that there was no game, no strategy, no way to win when your opponent had already taken everything. But Lucia was right about one thing. She had time. However long Nico kept her here, whatever life he'd constructed for her, she had time to learn his patterns, his weaknesses, his blind spots. Time to figure out how to destroy him, or save herself, or maybe both. What do you know about Victor Antonov? Seraphina asked. Lucia's eyebrows rose. Why? Because Nico said my father's debt was to him originally, that if I ran, if this arrangement fell apart, Victor would collect. Yeah. Lucia's expression darkened. He's not good, even by our standards. Runs trafficking operations, mostly. Young women disappearing from Eastern Europe and showing up in places they'll never escape from. The kind of monster that makes Nico look like a saint. So Nico was telling the truth. About protecting me from him. Probably. Lucia paused. But that doesn't excuse what he did. Protection doesn't require ownership. Safety doesn't require erasing someone's identity. Nico had other options. He chose this one because he wanted me. Yes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of that truth settling between them. Is there any way out? Seraphina finally asked. Any legal loophole? Any? Not that wouldn't put you in danger. Lucia's voice was gentle. Your father's debt doesn't disappear just because you're unhappy. And Victor, she trailed off. Victor's the kind of man who would see your rebellion as an opportunity. Would use it to hurt Nico, through you. And believe me, what Nico's done to you would look like mercy compared to what Victor would do. So I'm trapped. For now. Lucia stood, moving toward the bookshelves. But trapped doesn't mean powerless. Nico gave you his name, his protection, his obsessive attention. Those are tools. Use them. To do what? To build your own life inside his cage. Lucia pulled a book from the shelf, something about contract law. To finish your degree, make connections, become someone who exists beyond being his wife, so that if you do eventually find a way out. She set the book on the desk. You have something to go back to. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. A strategy, a plan, a reason to keep moving forward instead of shattering completely. Seraphina opened the book, scanning the contents page, and felt something inside her chest unknot just slightly. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet. Lucia moved toward the door. You've got a long road ahead, and Nico's going to make it complicated, because he's an emotionally damaged control freak who thinks love looks like gilded cages. She paused. But for what it's worth, I think you're exactly what he needs. Someone who won't forgive him easily. Someone who'll make him work for every scrap of affection. I'll never love him. Maybe not. Lucia's smile was sad. But you might learn to understand him, and sometimes that's more dangerous than love. Then she was gone, leaving Seraphina alone with contract law and coffee, and the beginning of something that might eventually, impossibly, look like power. Nico found her in the study 3 hours later. She'd been so absorbed in reading. Contract law was surprisingly fascinating when your entire identity had just been legally transferred to someone else, that she didn't hear him enter. Just looked up to find him standing in the doorway, still wearing yesterday's suit, looking exhausted and somehow vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. You found the study, he said. Marco told me about it. I know. He told me he told you. Something that might have been amusement crossed Nico's face. He's been with me for 8 years. First time he's ever deliberately undermined my authority. Going to punish him? I'm going to give him a raise. Nico moved into the room, careful to keep distance between them. He understands something I'm still learning. What's that? That keeping you here means nothing if you're miserable. He gestured at the books, the paper spread across the desk. Mrs. Chen said you wanted to finish your degree. I've arranged for your professors to send coursework. You can complete everything remotely. Take exams here with a proctor. Seraphina wanted to throw the offer back in his face. Wanted to tell him that she didn't need his permission to continue her education, didn't need his arrangements or his accommodations or his attempts to make this cage comfortable. But Lucia's words echoed in her head. Use what he gives you. Fine, she said. Nico blinked, clearly surprised. Fine? I want to finish my degree. You're offering the resources to do that. I'll accept them. She met his eyes. But don't mistake this for forgiveness, or acceptance, or anything except strategic self-interest. I wouldn't dream of it. He said it with something that might have been respect. They stared at each other for a moment. This man who'd stolen her life, and this woman who was refusing to let that theft define her. And something shifted in the air between them. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, but perhaps the acknowledgement that they were both trapped now. Him by his obsession, her by his power. And neither of them quite sure how to escape. I'll have the course material sent up, Nico said finally. He turned to leave, but Seraphina's voice stopped him. What happens if I try to run again? He looked back, and the sadness in his eyes was answer enough. I find you, he said simply, and next time, I won't let you get as far as the street corner. Because you love me? Because, his jaw tightened, because the thought of you out there, unprotected, in danger, it makes me want to burn this entire city down until I find you. That's not love, that's possession. Maybe, Nico's voice was quiet, or maybe it's the only way someone like me knows how to love anything, badly, obsessively. Like if I don't hold on tight enough, you'll disappear. I have already disappeared. You made sure of that when you erased my identity. He flinched, actually flinched, like the words were physical blows. I know what I did, he said. And I know you hate me for it. But Seraphina, his eyes met hers, and the raw honesty in them was almost worse than the lies. I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this bearable for you, trying to give you everything, except the one thing you actually want, which is freedom. He said it like an apology, like acknowledgement that he'd built something beautiful and terrible, and the only way to escape it was to destroy them both. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him, and Seraphina sat alone in the study, without cameras, surrounded by books about contracts and law and ways to navigate systems designed to trap people. She had been given a cage lined with silk and education and coffee, exactly how she liked it. Now she just had to figure out how to turn comfort into a weapon, how to use Nico's obsession against him, how to become something more than his wife, his possession, his carefully maintained fantasy. She opened her laptop, another gift, another tool, and started researching. Not contract law this time, but Viktor Antonov, because if she was going to survive this, If she was going to find any leverage in this impossible situation, she needed to understand the monster Nico had supposedly saved her from. Needed to know if the cage he'd built was actually protection, or just another lie dressed up as love. The game had begun. And Seraphina Vale, no, Seraphina DeLuca now, was done being a piece on someone else's board. It was time to learn the rules, so she could break every single one.